Okay.
All right, we got speed.
Okay. All right, first, tell me your first and last name and spelling.
My name is Karen Edmonds Spelman, and the spelling of it, Karenedmonds. The last name is Spelman, Spellman. When I worked in SNCC, my name was Karen Edmonds.
Now, tell me what years you worked in Atlanta and what you did there.
Okay. I came to Atlanta in 1966, just after having been at the Meredith March in Mississippi. And the climate was such that I had been wanting for so many years to work full-time for SNCC, and there came a chance for me to do that. I was asked to come to Atlanta to the national office to be the research person there at the national office. So I packed up all my bags and moved from Washington, D.C. To Atlanta, Georgia, to work full-time on staff with SNCC.
And then how old were you at the time?
I was not 12. I was about 22 when
Well,
I...
let's say at the time, this includes a little bit of my question in your answers because they won't hear me. So.
Oh, okay. At the time, I was 22 years old. I had graduated from Howard University. I was active in the Nonviolent Action Group, which was a student support group for SNCC that was based at Howard University. So I wasn't a stranger to SNCC, but I had never committed to full-time work because I had to work and support my family. I was the first to graduate from college in my family.
And then how was SNCC different from organizations like CORE and SCLC?
Well, I'd like to talk more about there were similarities and there were differences. Contrary to what a lot of historians have written, there was a lot of camaraderie and cooperation between SCLC, CORE, and SNCC. We had a lot of friends that worked with SCLC, a lot of friends that worked with CORE. My dad, who was the person who mentored me in the civil rights movement, was a president of the Greensboro NAACP chapter when the sit-ins and all of the demonstrations against segregation were taking place. So I grew up in the NAACP atmosphere. Some of my friends went and worked for CORE, and some worked for SNCC. The reason why I didn't work for NAACP is because they were an older generation. They were controlled by people who were my dad's age, and their ideas were pretty much of his generation, and that's understandable. We respected them, and there were some things that I, as a young person, agreed with, and some things I didn't. But SNCC embodied it all for me. I had friends who were working there. One of my very close friends was Charlie Cobb, and his father and my father were best friends, so Charlie and I grew up together. And he would always come to Washington and tell me stories about what was going on down south and what he was doing, and I frankly was a little jealous. I wanted to go south eventually. So I volunteered and worked in the Washington office when I was a student at Howard. And there came a time when I saved up enough money to be able to go south and work full-time. So that's what I did. But even in Atlanta, I think the first dinner I ever had was at Martin Luther King's house. He invited Stokely and Ralph Featherstone and a couple of others from SNCC. He said, come on over and have some dinner with me. And I said, can I go? I want to go. You know, I've never met Martin Luther King before. And they begrudgingly let me go. So I was so glad I did, because I got a chance to see the interaction between SNCC and SCLC at a more informal level. There's lots of laughter and kidding and jostling. And you know, eventually Dr. King would ask questions, what is this new black power? And how do you think this is going to work? And are you afraid that white people will be alienated? But it wasn't in an accusatory manner. He wanted to really understand what our thinking was. So we talked freely, and then, SNCC people would ask him questions. What position are you going to take against the war in Vietnam? Because at that time, we had already taken a position opposing the war in Vietnam. So, he said, well, we're thinking about it, and, he would drift off into something else, but it was a totally cordial exchange, and I was really shocked. I thought it was going to be a tense discussion, that there was going to be, a lot of accusations back and forth. Why didn't you stay at this march, and why did you leave when everybody else was moving? But that didn't happen. So the SCLC folks were religion-based. The SCLC folks were religion-based. It was a group of ministers. My dad was one of the co-founders of SCLC, and he was a Congregational or United Church of Christ minister. So again, a lot of the people in the SCLC were older than SNCC people were. We were students. We had many more ideas about how to do things, and we wanted to have an organization of our own where we weren't controlled by anybody but ourselves. So that is a major difference between SNCC and SCLC, but we cooperated totally on all the marches. We made each organization aware of what was going on as far as demonstrations were concerned. When Jesse Jackson would come to town, he'd hang out with the SNCC folks because he was more our age than some of the preachers that were in SCLC. Leon Hall was another SCLC organizer that was our age, and we used to have a lot of good times with Leon as well. So I'd say that while we worked within our own organizations, and we both had organizations, that there was a lot of cross-fertilization and a lot of good times that we had together. We trusted each other and we supported each other.
Right. And then back to when you were saying you actually met with Martin Luther King and he asked you questions, how did you answer those questions?
Well, I was there by the hair of my chinny chin chin. I was brand new in Atlanta, and I knew Ralph Featherstone, who was one of the senior officers in SNCC, and I just begged him. I said, can I go? And he said, okay, you can go, but be quiet. So, so I was there. He was very cordial to me because I was the only woman present. The rest of the people there were the brothers. And he spoke to me, and he greeted, Dr. King greeted me. He called me young lady, in his voice. But nonetheless, I was included. We were sitting around the kitchen table. It wasn't like we were in in the living room sitting down. We were around the kitchen table, and Mrs. King was warming up the leftovers from their meal that they had that day. This was on Sunday evening, and as you know, if you were Baptist, you go to the Vespers or evening church, and then you come home and you have the leftovers from the earlier dinner. So that's what we got, and we were very happy about it. But I wasn't given an opportunity to respond. I was there as an observer.
Okay. Then what's your strongest memory about being in SNCC?
Well, I lived in Atlanta for 9 years, a total of 9 years.
You can say your strongest memory if you can, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'm leading into it.
Okay.
Let me give my own stuff.
Okay.
Trying to set it up.
Yes.
All right. I lived in Atlanta for 9 years, and I lived there as a civil rights worker, as a professional, as a mother, and eventually as a student at Georgia Tech, where I went and got my master's degree there in city planning. So there are a lot of different eras of my life that was spent in Atlanta. The work that I did with SNCC was probably the strongest and most important of all of the times I spent in Atlanta. I came there as a student, a former student, I came there to work full-time. I was a part of an organization that valued my opinion, that I was able to find my niche. I worked in the office there, and I produced a lot of background materials and research documents. I worked on our newspaper, The Student Voice. I was able to help a lot of people in the field facilitate their projects. The Lowndes County elections probably were the most vivid memory for me. And that was the time in 1966 when SNCC had organized the Lowndes County, Alabama slate of candidates for the Black Panther Party. And a lot of people get confused about which Black Panther Party are you talking about. The very first Black Panther Party was organized as a SNCC project in Lowndes County, Alabama. It was the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, and their mascot was a Black Panther. And the Black Panther was a symbol that the SNCC office in Atlanta gave to Stokely and Bob Mance, who were the main organizers down there. I can remember Ruth Howard went to the Atlanta University Library and was looking through a series of yearbooks trying to find something that would be a good mascot for this organization. And she found an emblem of the Black Panther. And so that was given to the Lowndes County Freedom Organization as their mascot. Well, as you know, history